Dear ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost I have to apologize for not being with you here in Tbilisi. Alas, due to a number of circumstances, I have to be in Canada. But we're happy enough that we have all those futuristic technologies that allow me to address you from Canada, and you can hear me in Tbilisi. So let me tell you a few words about this little book. This book is about the roots of one of the conflicts in what is now a strategically important area of the world, the South Caucasus. It provides detailed analysis of the military, political and diplomatic struggle for Abkhazia and Sochi in 1918-1921 between Russia and Georgia. We know that Georgia was temporarily Sovieticized in 1921 and remained part of the USSR up until 1991, but now it's independent again. This book also examines the major processes that fueled the ethnic hatred in the region. This region is one of those hot spots where polar ideologies and economic interests of major world powers, and by the way regional powers as well, collide, but which somehow gets neglected by politicians and the media, leaving the small nations involved in the conflict at the mercy of their powerful neighbor, Russia, powerful and ambitious neighbor, by the way. The major problem is that both in Europe and in the United States of America, both the scholars and the politicians sincerely believed that as Georgia was Sovietized in 1921, it stopped being an independent nation, just a backyard of the Russian Empire, or the USSR, whatever you call it, and one is not supposed to learn anything about its history, about its ethnic composition, about its culture, etc., etc. And when all of a sudden the USSR collapsed, the world found itself in an information vacuum. By the way, that vacuum was very quickly filled with propaganda, with the Russian imperial propaganda. And many of you probably heard all those fairy tales about Stalin giving Abkhazia to Georgia, Stalin giving South Ossetia to Georgia, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, that's not true, but the question arises: where to find the true information? Well, that was one of the reasons why I've written this book. By the way, this book also exists in Russian, but of course, right now we're talking about the English version of the book. But generally speaking, they are identical. So this book concentrates only on one little-known episode of regional history, the dramatic events that took place in 1918-1921 in Abkhazia and in the Black Sea Riviera. That's how they called the district of Sochi those days. It demonstrates, by the way, that the artificial so-called Abkhazian nationalism and Abkhazian separatism had been created artificially and exploited by outside forces that include, but are not limited to, the Ottoman Empire, the Bolshevik Russia, and even the anti-Bolshevik Russian White Movement. All of them were interested in the acquisition of Abkhazia, of its territory, in order to get control over the whole South Caucasus. At the same time, despite their mutual bitterness, both Red and White Russian leaders demonstrated a striking and shocking unanimity on the question of the status of Abkhazia and the Sochi district. Both Reds and Whites sought to prevent the integration of this area and, by the way, of the Sochi district into democratic Georgia. Both parties worked hard with some elements of local population, trying to exploit and develop their so-called anti-Georgian sentiments. The book draws parallels between the post-World War I imperialist ambitions of Russia, both the communist and anti-communist Russia, and the modern aggressive hegemonism of the Kremlin. Indeed, history seems to repeat itself again after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, when the South Caucasus once again gained strategic importance. Indeed, today it serves as a natural corridor through which Western countries could get access to the vital hydrocarbon resources of Central Asia bypassing Russia. That is the major reason why the leadership of the Russian Federation considers it crucially important to restore its political control over the recently independent states of the South Caucasus, or alternatively, to destabilize them to the extent that the newly opened land bridge between Europe and Asia would not function. That could explain why not only reactionary Russian top brass and secret services, but also well-known so-called democratic Russian politicians stood united against Georgia and her territorial integrity. Those combined efforts resulted in the wars and ethnic cleansings of 1992, 1993, and also of the ethnic cleansings of the year 2008, the occupation of Abkhazia and the breach of Georgia's territorial integrity. However, I would take the liberty to say that the current situation in Abkhazia became possible not only due to the military superiority of the Russian Federation, but to a large extent due to the fact that the history of Abkhazia and her legal and cultural connections with the rest of Georgia remain unknown to the decision makers, as well as to the politically active public both in the West and in Russia. That's why, by the way, I wrote the Russian variant of the book as well. In any case, the paucity of publicly available objective information on the Abkhazian situation opens up great opportunities for ideologically loaded and sometimes even instigative interpretations of this sensitive issue. In view of the above, this book also aims to provide a concise description and analysis of the process of integration of Abkhazia and, in part, of the Sochi district into the Georgian state in the years 1918-1921, listing the international treaties, the inter-party agreements, and other events that provided legal basis for the association of Abkhazia with Georgia. Let me finish by telling you that this book is just the beginning of a series of books on the regional history that will cover not only Abkhazia, of course, but also Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Those books, some of them are already prepared for printing, others we are still working on, and they will be published in co-authorship with my friend and colleague George Partskaladze. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I hope you will enjoy reading this book.